Internet, and welcome to this week's video where I am going to be taking a look at, shall we say, unfortunate death throughout history. Because, as everyone knows, comedy is, tragedy plus time, and, or in certain cases, tragedy plus stupidity. So, I have decided to take a break from the usual sort of more stringent history and deal with a little levity. In this case, as I've said, my personal top 10 over amusing deaths throughout history. We begin with number 1, Draco of Athens. Now, Draco is a fairly interesting fellow because he was the sort of lawgiver of Athens, the one who created the first written down fully comprehensive law code and instituted court systems in the ancient Greek world. Unfortunately, he did it to such a degree that the Athenians got really upset that the laws were so drastic and so harsh, in fact the word draconian stems from his name, that they kicked him out of Athens and exiled him. Now, he didn't take this lying down, so in exile he staged a large play to exonerate himself and, just prove what a great guy he was, and his followers so appreciated it, applauded him in the traditional Greek fashion by throwing hats, cloaks, shirts and other clothing items onto Draco, so much so that he, suffocated and died. There is no surviving evidence whether or not the people who thus killed him were punished by his methods. Number 2 is Clement Wallingham, a Ohio statesman and lawyer back in the time around the American Civil War. Now, Wallingham had a long and colorful career, including both supporting the Union during the American Civil War and being kicked out of the Union during the American Civil War. However, after the war, he settled down as a lawyer, and in 1871, he represented a fellow who had been accused of murdering another individual in a bar brawl. Now, Wallingham had the idea that instead the other person had been killed by accident when he tried to draw a gun from from inside his jacket and shoot Wallingham's client. So, espousing on that theory during a meeting with his fellow defense lawyers, he drew a gun from inside his jacket, and on the plus side, his client was found innocent. Number 3 is General John Sedgwick, one of the more successful Union commanders, again during the American Civil War. He was a corps commander in the Army of the Potomac during most of the war and was in fact fairly successful about it. However, in 1864 at the Battle of Spotsylvania, he felt that his men were taking too much cover from Confederate sharpshooters who were too far away, so he chivied them. "Men, why are you hiding? They couldn't hit an elephant from this distance." Of course, immediately after that, one of the Confederate sharpshooters put a bullet right under his eye and into his brain. But, he at least went out with some flourish. Moving back to ancient Greece for number 4, we have Aeschylus, the father of modern-day tragedy, or the sort of father of modern-day playwriting, so to speak. He was, at the time, incredibly famous. He basically redefined what it means to put on plays in ancient Greece, which is, of course, basically created tropes and effects that are lasting all the way up to our time. However, he eventually went to visit Sicily, where he had been several other times and was very popular, and one time while outside the city he was visiting, he was sitting down doing some stuff when some seabird had picked up a turtle in order to eat it. Now, how do seabirds kill turtles for them to eat? Well, they drop them on rocks, and Aeschylus happened to have a shiny bald head. And I don't particularly need to say more. To be perfectly honest, I think it's only fitting that the father of modern-day, comedy and tragedy should be killed in a way that could basically be a Mel Brooks farce. Moving on to number 5, we have Hans Steiniger. Now, you probably never heard of Hans Steiniger. That's because he was a relatively unknown burgomaster in a small Austrian town back in the 1500s. And, he was famous for really only one thing. He had what was, according to sort of local rumor at the time, the world's longest beard, at least 5 foot in length. Unfortunately, he himself wasn't actually that much taller than that, so he usually carried the beard rolled up and carried inside a leather bag around him. Unfortunately, apparently one day, there was a fire that broke out, and Mr. Steiniger was supposed to, move away from the fire as quickly as possible without noticing that he hasn't rolled up his beard at that point, at which point he, well, you guessed it, he stepped on his beard, fell down, and broke his neck. So, I just want to give a fair warning to all hipsters out there. This can be what you are in for. Moving on deservedly to Qin Shi Huangdi, the first recognized historical emperor of a united China. He was thus a fairly, significant person in world history and honestly deserved better than he get. Unfortunately, like many other powerful rulers, especially apparently in China, he was obsessed with the idea that, of course, his heirs were apparently not good enough for him, so he wanted immortality. And he had a bunch of, warlocks, wizards, sorcerers, and that kind of thing, doctors, come up with a way to gain him immortality, and eventually they came up with a very good idea. All he had to do was daily take 3 of these pills that we have developed for you, using this wonderfully new, exciting, silvery liquid that we have found, and we are certain that you will live forever in absolutely no time, so to speak. I probably don't need to tell you what happens if you daily ingest pills made from mercury. On the other hand, he got a very nice terracotta army out of it, so it wasn't a complete waste. Moving on to number 7, we have Edmund Ironside. On the great stage of life, he played the King of England about 1200 years ago or more. And, he apparently had been kinging it around for quite a bit one day because he decided that after lunch, it would be a good idea to, take a trip to the royal stool and get rid of some of the stuff he just ate, which he did. Now, apparently, being a king, he didn't look where he sat, so he didn't notice, for some reason, the assassin with a spear hiding inside his lavatory. Yes, Edmund Ironside literally died from having a spear stuck up his ass. Talking about having a stick up your bottom. For number 8, we have Empedocles of Greece. Moving back again to ancient Greece, we have a philosopher who became so convinced about the power of his own intellect and reasoning that he had managed to convince himself that he was in fact a god and thus immortal. Maybe this Chinese emperor should have thought about that particular method before starting to, chew down on breath mints made from mercury. Unfortunately, it didn't go Empedocles much better because, of course, eventually he had to prove his immortality to certain of his disciples, and he decided to do that by jumping into Etna, an active volcano in southern Italy, in fact on Sicily. So, admittedly, no one actually knows if he was immortal. What I can say is he never came back from the jump. So, maybe he's up there. For number 9, we have a more, shall we say, recent matter. As I said, comedy is basically tragedy plus time, but it can also be tragedy plus stupidity, which a fellow by the name of David Grundman, age 27 in 1982, set out to prove in Arizona in the United States of America. Now, in Arizona, it is, of course, illegal to bring down the big saguaro cacti because they are a protected species. Now, David didn't particularly care about that. He felt that it could be a fun afternoon to go out and bring one down by shooting it repeatedly with his shotgun. Now, what someone probably should have told David is that a shotgun is a fairly short-range weapon, and if you shoot a cactus enough, it will, of course, eventually fall over, but it will probably fall over to the side you're shooting it from. I guess you can figure out the rest by here. They found David lodged under a cactus. I don't know if he have to pry the shotgun from his cold dead fingers, but, at least it's a fairly unique way to go. Crushed by cactus. Not many of us can say that. And finally, at number 10, we have one of my favorites. Henri, Count of Champagne. one of the richest and most influential noblemen in Europe in the late 12th century. He participated in the Third Crusade along with Philip of France and Richard the Lionheart, and was in fact in 1192 elected King of Jerusalem, and thus at least titular head of the Outremer Society in Palestine. He died 5 years later in his palace in Acre. Why his palace was in Acre and not Jerusalem? Well, Jerusalem had kind of already fallen to the Muslim armies, but that's another story. Anyway, there was a military parade going on, and he was in his palace in Acre and wanted to see what was going on, so he was leaning out of the window and still couldn't see what was going on, so he summoned one of his servants to lift him up a bit. Some indications even suggest that this servant was a dwarf by the name of Scarlet that he had crouching on the floor so he could step on. But whatever else happens, apparently the servant moved a little bit, and Henri lost his balance, fell out of the window, fell down, and killed himself on the courtyard. And again, to add insult to injury, according to all stories, the servant came tumbling after, and he could in fact have survived if he hadn't been hit by his own servant. Now, if this is not immediately amusing to you, at least think about this. Killed by human footstool! How many people can honestly claim that while at the same time being King of Jerusalem? There is something about that, to be completely honest. Well, that was that. I hope you all enjoyed that and got a quick little giggle. I will probably be shooting videos about this size, about this kind of stuff for a while. I will, of course, also do the longer, more, shall we say, heavy history videos, but I feel like we need a little levity in the world. And if people falling out of windows after stepping on midgets isn't funny, I honestly don't want to live in this world anymore. Until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.